or what I've suffered for your sake, the one I love so dear. I wish that I could go with you, or you might tarry here. And when you're on some distant land, think on your absent friend. And when the wind blows high and clear, a line to me pray send. And when the wind blows high and clear, pray send it love to me, so I might know by your handwrite how times has gone with thee.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Augusta 2021, and we're here with a nest of singing birds, Cecil Sharp's collections, the singers and their songs, with Sheila K. Adams. My name is Andrew, and I'm your Augusta Zoom host. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. Our programming is made possible with generous support from the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Davis-Elkins College. And most of all, we'd like to thank you. So many of you viewers have been important in making Augusta continue on through these tough times, and that soon enough we'll be knee to knee and toe to toe singing and playing together soon enough. Participants, you're muted right now in the session, but if you have a question, we'll get to those at the end of the session, so just feel free to pop those in the chat, and I'll make sure that Sheila gets your questions at the end of the session. This session is being recorded and archived, and will be available on the live events, Zoom links, and archive videos lesson on the Augusta Arts and Culture website. Additionally, we are live streaming right now to YouTube, so other folks in the World Wide Web are watching us right now. And again, if you need to access the chat to ask questions during the session, just look at the bottom of your Zoom window and you should see your little chat bubble, and you can pop up and have your chat there as well. So again, I mentioned we're here with Sheila K. Adams, and we're so happy to have North Carolina's finest ballad singer with us right now. So Sheila grew up in a small community in North Carolina where singing was as natural as breathing, and she learned the music from her family and relative. And she says they sang songs that they called love songs, though they often ended in tragedy. And she's just here to bring us a window into that world and share some stories and songs with us about that. So we're so happy to have Sheila K. Adams with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad to be here. Well, hello. I see some familiar faces out there. It's so good to see y'all. Hey, Mimi, all the way out in California. And there's Mr. Flan Williams. I see him too. Yes? Cool. Well, so we're going to talk about Cecil Sharp. And who in the world was Cecil Sharp? Well, Cecil Sharp was the man that put together this book. And if you see, it's a big book. And it is folk songs, English folk songs from the Southern Appalachians. Now, in the introduction to the first edition, there's a lot of good stuff that I'm going to be pointing out to you, but I'm also going to be telling you stories about when Cecil Sharp was in that part of the world that I grew up in, which is a little community called Sodom. Now, back in the day, my daddy said that the roads were pretty much the same as they had been back in the Civil War days, and he was born in 1920. And he said that when they were still talking about this man that showed up in a white suit with a little string tie around his neck, and said, why, we didn't know whether to sing for him or not because we thought he might be a German spy, because he came all the way over here from across the big pond. And they were talking about Cecil Sharp, who was a musicologist and a folklorist from Oxford, and he wound up in Madison County, North Carolina, which he called a nest of singing birds. And Maud Carplees was his assistant who came along with him, and she notated the words to the songs while Sharp wrote down the music. And he says in the book that there was a peculiarity in the way that the singers sang in what he called the Laurel Country. They have one vocal peculiarity, which I have never noticed amongst English folk singers. namely the habit of dwelling arbitrarily upon certain notes of the melody, generally the weaker accents. This practice, which is almost universal, by disguising the rhythm and breaking up the monotonous regularity of the phrases, produces an effect of improvisation and freedom from rule, which is very pleasing. Now, when I was growing up, of course, I listened to the radio just like every other teenager of the 60s, but I was also listening to my Granny Dale sing, and the picture right here is a picture of the Burton Cove. And that is where I grew up, sitting on my granny's porch, learning these old love songs. And the way that I learned them was a manner that she called knee to knee. And I think, according to what Granny said, that was the way that a lot of the old folks, and when she said old folks, being born in 1998, you can imagine they were early 1890s, 1880s, and they were singing for Cecil Sharp, who came the first year in 1916. And he was here 3 summers in a row, 1916, 17, and 18, and he spent 42 weeks during those 3 summers going about the Southern Appalachians. But the first year that he was here was spent primarily in Madison County and a little bit over into East Tennessee. And while he was here, that first year, he did not have a camera. So when I was at the Cecil Sharp house, they wanted me to sit down and look at all of these pictures that they had, that they were not sure who they were. And I couldn't identify a single one of them because when he was in Madison County in 1916, he did not have his camera with him. So I was no use to him there, but I sure did get to hold the very book that Cecil Sharp wrote down the songs that my great-great-aunt Mary Sands sang for him. And she sang 27 songs for Cecil Sharp. And he notated all of them, and Maud Carpelese wrote down the words. This is one of them that I learned from Dillard Chandler, and I'm gonna sing Soldier Traveling from the North, just so that you'll get an idea of what Sharp was talking about when he said that they would stress notes and hold notes that weren't even supposed to be stressed and accented, but it served the purpose. It served the purpose by allowing people that were singing to kind of check their audience out and see if they were paying attention. Because whenever you do something that's completely backwards to what you're supposed to be doing, it gets everybody's attention, and so they'll lay right in there with you. So this is one that Dillard Chandler sang out off the porch at Granny Dale's house. He called it Soldier Traveling from the North. I think Sharp, the true name for it is Trooper and the Maid. A soldier traveling from the north, while the moon shined bright and clearly, the lady knowed the gentleman's horse, because she loved him dearly. She took the horse by the bridle reins, and she led it to the stable. There's hay and oats for ye horse to eat. Go feed him, you are able. She took him by the lily white hand, and she led him to the table. There's cake and wine for you, my love, Go eat and drink, you're welcome. She pulled off her blue silk gown, and she throwed it across the table. He pulled off his uniform suit, and he hopped in the bed with the lady. I heard some trumpets sound, my love, and I must go and find them. Oh, soldier dear, don't you leave me here, for I am burnt forever. When silver bells and conch shell stands, when you and I shall marry. Oh, soldier dear, don't you leave me here, for I am burnt forever. Now that was Dillard Chandler's version of Soldier Traveling from the North. Now, in that song, the last two verses where she says, "Oh, soldier dear, don't leave me here, for I am burnt forever." Now, me and Granny were doing a show together one time at Western Carolina University down here in North Carolina, and on stage together, I decided just, on that very second of the moment when I was singing that song, to change "burnt" to "ruined," because I was afraid the audience wouldn't know what "burnt" meant. And so the first time that I said it, this hand comes out of nowhere, and I'm always closing my eyes when I sing, so I had no idea that it was coming. And this hand comes out of nowhere and smacks right straight over my mouth. And she says, "Don't pay any attention to her. She's still a young'un, and she don't know that burnt is a lot worse than ruined." So I reckon that girl was just plumb burnt. So, but when Sharp came, he makes a point of mentioning that the people in the Laurel Country do this sighing at the end of certain lines. They stress notes that are not supposed to be stressed, and that the pauses, he says the pauses and the almost tripping over words is what he meant by it. Because they would hold, like in "A soldier traveling from the north, while the moon shine bright and clearly." So you can hear how they kind of sped up parts of the song so that they could get all those words in. And they never missed an opportunity to throw another word in, and that's the truth. And Sharp mentions that in his book as well. But he says here, the effort that has been made to collect and preserve in permanent form the folk songs of England during the last 20 or 30 years has resulted in the salvage of many thousands of beautiful songs. It was pardonable, therefore, if those who, like myself, had assisted in the task had come to believe that the major part of the work had been completed. So far as the collection in England itself was concerned, this belief was no doubt well founded. Nevertheless, in arriving at this conclusion, one important, albeit not very obvious, consideration had been overlooked, namely the possibility that one or other of those English communities that lie scattered in various parts of the world might provide as good a field for the collector as England itself, and yield as bountiful and rich a harvest. The investigation which my colleague, Mrs. John C. Campbell, who was Olive Dame Campbell, began, she was the one that started collecting the love songs first, and in which later on I came to bear a hand, has proved that at least one such community does in fact exist in the southern Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. And he goes on to say that their usual procedure was to stay over at settlement schools while they were on this trip. And he said that the richest amount of wealth of these songs that he found was in what he referred to as the Laurel Country. And he said the present inhabitants of the Laurel Country are the direct descendants of the original settlers who were immigrants from England, and I suspect the lowlands of Scotland. And he was exactly right, because Granny referred to our family as being them Scots, but whenever she said they came from Ireland, now you'd have to look Ireland up on a map, and I did try for a couple of days. Finally went to my father and said, Daddy, Granny talks all the time about Ireland, but I don't know, I can't find it on the map nowhere on this globe. And Daddy said, well, now there you go. I'm spending all this tax money and sending you off to that Laurel school over there, and you can't even find Ireland. And right there it is, right straight across from Scotland and England. So they did have a peculiar way of talking, even if they weren't singers, which my father was a great whistler, but I don't remember ever hearing him sing that much. But he's got one more little thing that I want to read for you that he says about the inhabitants of the Laurel Country, and which he predicted, by the way, that by 1950 this tradition would be dead and gone because of the Industrial Revolution. That the illiterate may nevertheless, and he mentions early on that most of them could read and write, but only on a very minor type level, that the illiterate may nevertheless reach a high level of culture will surprise those only who imagine that education and cultivation are convertible terms. The reason I take it, why these mountain people, albeit unlettered, have acquired so many of the essentials of culture, is partly to be attributed to the large amount of leisure they enjoy, without which, of course, no cultural development is possible, but chiefly to the fact that they have one and all entered at birth into the full enjoyment of their racial heritage. Their language, wisdom, manners, and the many graces of life that are theirs are merely racial attributes which have been gradually acquired and accumulated in the past centuries and handed down generation by generation, each generation adding its quotum to that which it received. It must be remembered also that in the everyday lives of these people, they are immune from that continuous grinding mental pressure due to the attempts to make a living, from which nearly all of us in the modern world suffer. Here, no one is on the make. Commercial competition and social rivalries are unknown. In this respect, at any rate, they have the advantage over those who habitually spend the greater part of every day in preparing to live, in acquiring the technique of life, rather than in its enjoyment. So I will have to say that Cecil Sharp can't really be brought to task over that comment about the amount of leisure time that my family enjoyed, because my family really didn't enjoy a lot of leisure time. He was just there during the putting up time. I mean, in between the putting in and the putting up time. So they had some leisure time to sit on the porch, and all back while he was visiting. But as soon as he was gone, I can guarantee you they were not sitting around on the porch. I've been in many of a tobacco field, and that doesn't happen until the end of September. But of course, Sharp was unaware of all that because he was already back over in England. But when he came through, I know from having read so in his diaries that he had such a hard time with his diet because, now, some of you out there in the audience have eaten mountain cooking, and it's almost like everything from corn on the cob to cornbread, just about it, had to be fried in something before it hit the table. Even if it was boiled, it had to be fried somehow. So, and it usually had fatback or streaky meat put in it. And so, with being a vegetarian, Cecil Sharp had a hard time in the mountains, especially with my family. He said that the food that we put into our mouths was atrocious, and he couldn't imagine feeding it to his dog. But he somehow managed to survive. He somehow managed to survive all of those weeks while he was in the mountains. And my guess is that he ate a lot of pork while he was here, because that's pretty much it. But my Aunt Zip, who lived to be 108 years plus 4, because she said she would not have it, said that it was a sinful thing for her to brag about her long life, because she was really 112 years old. So on her tombstone, it says Zephora Chandler Rice. And then it's got her age as being 108 years plus 4. So she was 112 years old. She said she was not going to be and act like she is high-minded because she lived to be as long as she did. But she did sing for Cecil Sharp when he was here in 16, and she lived long enough to tell me about his visit with her in the early 70s when I went over and recorded to find out what she thought of Cecil Sharp when he showed up to record her. And she said, well, now you have to remember that Aunt Zip, being as old as she was, she couldn't hear anything, and she couldn't see anything. But if you screamed into her left ear, then she was able to barely hear. So my mother screamed into her ear, "It's my daughter, Aunt Zip, and she's come to interview you." And I said, "Wrong word, Mama. Tell her I just want her to tell me a story." And Mama said, "Well, are you not going to..." So I had to first have a conversation with my mother to get her out of the way. And she then finally got it across to Aunt Zip. I wanted to hear the story about when the Englishman came to record her song. And she said, "Why, I remember that feller as plain as if he was standing in front of me right now. He had on a white suit and the shiniest black shoes that I'd ever seen in my life. It's like you could see your picture right there on the toe of his big shiny black shoes." And she said, "You know, in 1916, they was the biggest cloud bust that come over Madison County, and that caused the awfulest rainstorm ever was to come, and the biggest flood that they'd ever had in Marshall, and it washed all the bridges away and just done away with everything, and people had foot logs that they had cut trees down and chopped the limbs off of for folks to walk across the creeks and the branches, which were all overflowing." And so Sharp shows up during that summer. Of course he did. And he hated foot logs. He talked about the precarious placement of natural bridges. And I screamed in Aunt Zip's ear and said, "Natural bridges?" She said, "Yeah, that's what he called them foot logs going across the creek, was a natural bridge." And said he needed something to hold on to. So I sent my boy. I said, "Adam, go over yonder and bring back that Englishman who looks like he's just about down on the other side of the footlog. You're going to have to carry him on your back over here. So Adam went across the bridge, and I couldn't ask Adam because Aunt Zip outlived every single one of her children. And so she was being cared for by great-grandchildren when she finally passed away. But Adam went across the footlog, gathered up Cecil Sharp, and she said to me, "Why, he said he didn't weigh but near nothing. Said, why, he could have swung him up on his hip just like a big baby and carried him across, but he didn't want to embarrass him nor nothing." So but he did carry Cecil Sharp across, and Maud Carpelese picked her way, as Adam said, rather daintily across that footlog and had no problems whatsoever. So the songs that Aunt Zip sang for him, one of them has been my very favorite down through the years. It was she actually sang the 7 Nights Drunk for him, and I think it probably set him back on his heels when she sung the last 3 verses, because I've heard them, but I'm not going to sing them, because your imagination is much better than anything that could be put into words. So, but I will sing the first 4 verses that Aunt Zip sang for me that day and said, and I sung them just like this. I come home the other night as drunk as I could be, and I saw a horse a-standing in a stable where my horse art to be. Said, come here, my little wifey, explain this thing to me. Whose horse is that standing in the stable where my horse art to be? Hey, you blind fool, you drunk old fool, now can't you plainly see? That's only a milk cow your granny sent to me. Well, I've traveled this whole world over 100 times or more, but a saddle on a milk cow's back I never did see before. I come home the other night as drunk as I could be, and I saw a hat hanging on the rack where my hat art to be. I said, well, come here, little wifey, explain this thing to me. Whose hat is that a-hanging on the rack where my hat art to be? You blind fool, you drunk old fool, can't you plainly see? That's only a dish rag your granny sent to me. Well, I've traveled this whole world over 100 times or more, but a J.B. Stetson dish rag I never did see before. I come home the other night as drunk as I could be, and I saw some breeches laying in the floor where mine art to be. Said, come here, my little wifey, explain this thing to me. Now whose breeches is that laying on the floor where mine art to be? You blind fool, you drunk old fool, now can't you plainly see? Why, that's only a flour sack that your granny sent to me. Well, I've traveled this whole world over 100 times or more, but a zipper on a flour sack now I never did see before. I come home the other night as drunk as I could be, and I saw a head a-laying on the pillar where my head art to be. I said, come here, little wifey, and explain this thing to me. Whose head is that a-laying on the pillar where my head art to be? Oh, you blind fool, you drunk old fool, now can't you plainly see? Why, that's only a cabbage head your granny sent to me. Well, I've traveled this whole world over 1,000 times or more, but now a mustache on a cabbage head I just never did see before. And you can use your imagination on the last 3, 'cause it goes downhill pretty quick. But anyway, she said I sang all 7 verses for him, and I thought he was going to swaller his tongue a-sitting right there in the chair across from me. Said, I've never seen a man laugh as hard in all of my life. But he did not put the 3 verses she sung in the book, so. But she did sing them for me. And my mother was over there wringing her hands and saying, Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy. And I said, I don't think that's what this song's about, Mama. It's okay, though. It's okay. She knows what she's doing. She's only 104, so she knows exactly what she's doing. Now, she said that a lot of the young people, because I always wondered, with Granny having been born in 1898, with her having been born then, and her sister Brazilla, who had a beautiful ballad singing voice, and even Cas Wallin, who was born in 1900, and Lee Wallin, who was born in 1890, I always wondered why they didn't sing for Cecil Sharp, because he makes mention in this book that there were, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I'm trying to get so much in this hour. Anyway, Sharp, oh, yeah, he mentions that you're just as apt to run up on a young person that can sing these songs all the way through as an older person, whereas he said in England at that time that you literally had to go to the oldest part of the population in order to hear these songs. But he said here in the Laurel country, you could have a child as young as 5 or 6. Or he said he had one man say to him, "Oh, if I was only driving the cows home in the evening, I could have sung that song from start to finish without missing a single verse, but I've left one out." And he said that they did sing the songs whenever they were working. He said sitting on the porch in the evening with the people of the Laurel country made him realize that he was sitting smack in the middle of a nest of singing birds. And so that's where I got the name for this. He said that the people were as apt to go to singing as they were to talking. He also mentions that leisure time again. Now, and in the summertime, when I was off from school, is when I learned the majority of the ballads. And right now, I might have problems remembering the words to a song that I heard, let's say, a year ago. But the ones that I learned when I was a child, I still remember. And I also found out from Cas Wallin why it was that Granny nor Burzell, nor himself, nor his brother Lee, nor his brother Jeter or Pascal sang for Cecil Sharp. It's because that was also right after the American chestnut trees had all started to die off, and the logging companies were coming in here and cutting all of them down, and they were building little railroad spurs that would go off up into these hollers and coves that had never seen civilization, let alone a railroad car with one tree on it, because the trees were so big. But that's why they did not sing for Cecil Sharp. Now, Granny really had me going one time because she said, well, the reason I didn't sing for him was because they told me he was a German spy, and that little woman that was with him, I know that they was took up together. I know it for a fact. And she said, and I wasn't going to sing for somebody carting around a young gal like that. And I said, well, Granny, how do you know all this stuff? She said, well, I just do. I said, well, who told you? And she said, well, nobody told me. I just figured her out for myself. Never did say nothing to nobody about it because, he seemed to be important. And then he sent me a book. And he didn't send her a book. He sent it to Aunt Zip. And when Aunt Zip got to where she couldn't see, she gave it to Granny. And so Granny had the book, the English folk songs from the Southern Appalachians. Now, one of her granddaughters, Debbie, has it now, so it's gone right down through the family, but it was a copy that was signed from Cecil Sharp to Aunt Zip. And there were, I think it was, let me check on my notes to make sure, but I think there were like 37, 38, somewhere in there. It was up in the 30s anyway. People that sang for Cecil Sharp when he was in Madison County, and I was related to all of them with the exception of Jane Gentry from Hot Springs, who sang an incredible number of songs for Sharp. She sang 67 songs for Cecil Sharp. It was, he said that was the most traditional ballads he had ever collected from one person, period. And he said that he collected over 240-some tunes in the Laurel country, different tunes for the love songs. Like, I've listened to Gene Ritchie sing some versions of the songs that I learned from my family, and pretty much they're totally, the tunes are different, but the stories are the same. And that happened a lot in the book. I would go to find a song that had been sung for Cecil Sharp, and I would be looking for it under like that Soldier Traveling from the North. I would start looking for Soldier Traveling from the North, and well, there is no Soldier Traveling from the North, because what they did at home was they would just use the first line of the love song, and that was its title, like Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair was the name of the song, but it's just Black is the Color in Sharp's book. So it took some getting used to going through the book, but now I'm coming out of a year of having had two apprentices that have worked with me for the last year. One of them is Ian Kirkpatrick, who got his master's degree from Appalachian State University. The other one is my daughter, Melanie. And so what Melanie did was to go through and document every song that was sung for Cecil Sharp by our family. And she said, Mama, are you aware that there's over 300 different tunes? There's over 400 songs. So Sharp was a little bit off because on his estimation of how many songs were sung, because there were a lot more than he thought that came from the Laurel Country, because they were sung by Mary Sands and a bunch of her cousins that would gang up and sit on the porch, and especially if there was an Englishman in a white suit who was a vegetarian, and they started talking about how he would go grazing wherever he was. He would just go along and he'd pluck up a plant off of the ground and put it in his mouth, And I guess he's trying to find something to eat. He's probably starved to death because he had left England and there were no vegetarians in the mountains that I'm aware of. My daddy used to say, no, there's no vegetarians. You ate whatever was put on the table and you were thankful to get it. So with Sharp, Aunt Zip said that, she said, now back in them days, she said, I could hear a feather fall all the way from the top of the barn and hit the ground with that soft dirt under it. And I can remember the sound of his voice. Said he had the prettiest accent you've ever heard in your life. Said he sounded just like you'd imagine the Queen would sound. So I would imagine, as cultured and refined as he was, that he probably did have an accent very similar to the Queen's. But the impact that Cecil Sharp had on my family, because we're kind of getting down to that time in this talk when I would like to talk about that a little bit. I've been fortunate in all of my travels and in mentioning this book. And one of the people who gave me a copy of this book is Mimi Wright, and she is in the Zoom room with us. So, Mimi, thank you so much for the copy that you gave me all those years ago. And I've received, as a matter of fact, I've given one to Bobby. I've given one to my daughter now, and I've still got two left. But Mimi's is my favorite one, so that's the one that I still have. But I know that what an impact that it has made just in the last year in the way that I thought about Cecil Sharp. Now, as far as I was concerned, Cecil Sharp would have been the beginning of the angels that marched through Madison County. All through down through the years they came. There was the Brown collection that was done in the 20s and 30s. There was Alan Lomax and John Lomax, who came through this part of the world. They came through Asheville, and as a result wound up spending some time in Madison County. There was then later in the 60s, of course, came one of my heroes, who was John Cohen. And what John Cohen did was to put what Cecil Sharp viewed in his number of weeks that he spent here in the Laurel Country, John Cohen made a film. And if you haven't seen John Cohen's film, End of an Old Song, it's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. But John Cohen sent me all of the material that he filmed that he did not use in that movie. He sent it to me, and I have it now. And to watch it is just an amazing thing. And see, even John Cohen's film that was made back in the 60s, all of those people are my relatives. You know, most of them have passed on now. But the impact that Cecil Sharp had when he came through is just an amazing thing, because it kept them singing until after he predicted it would be gone. But then we're still waiting in Madison County for the Industrial Revolution to come to us. You know, we're still waiting here. So it's not made much progress where Granny and them lived over in Sodom in the Burton Cove. They do have a paved road, but that's about the only difference in that picture, the way it looked in that painting and the way it looks right now. So Sharp, now although I am aware that there were other people who were collecting, Olive Dame Campbell, who contributed, I think it was like 80 songs or so. And I might be off on these numbers, but that's okay. It's better just to make a guesstimation than it is to try to look up the numbers right off the bat. But I think it was 80 or so songs that she contributed to this massive collection that he did. Because in the book, he's got different variants, like I think Barbary Allen has got, is it like 28 variants, which means different versions of the same song. And so Sharp's influence on this ballad singer still rings true to this day. There was a song that I was singing at the beginning when the room was filling up, that was called My Dearest Dear. And that song still holds a very special place in my heart, because it was collected on August the 5th, 1916, and right over the ridge from where my great-great-aunt Mary Sands was singing for Cecil Sharp, my grandmother went into labor and delivered my mother the very next day. Mama said she was born around 2 o'clock in the morning. So that song has a real special place in my heart. And I never would have known anything about Mary Sands. I wouldn't even have known anything about Mary Sands. I guess that's just the best way to leave that, because Cecil Sharp brought front and center all of these people that I was related to that sang these songs. And a lot of people ask me, well, why would somebody in the 60s get interested in this music that sounds so ancient and almost, well, out of place, is what my daddy called it. Daddy said that, why, them old songs, I don't know why you don't go to singing country and western, because that's where all the money is. You don't need to be singing them old love songs. And Daddy said, that's a sign of being poor. And I said, well, are we rich? And Daddy said, well, no. I said, well, good, then I'll just keep singing the old love songs then. And which did not please my father, but that's okay. From the time I was 13, I was a bane in his existence anyway, so there you go. But I was thinking that I would sing another one of Mary Sands' songs that she sang for Cecil Sharp. And the interesting thing is that all of the Wallings learned the songs as they were passed down from Aunt Mary Sands. Because when I would ask Kaz or Lee Bird Walling, where did you learn that song? Both of them would say, why, from Aunt Mary Sands. So she must have been quite the singer. As a matter of fact, he says that in his diary that he has never heard such a melodious tone to a person's voice as that which resided in the breast of Miss Mary Sands. So, here's one that she taught Kaz Wallen, and then he later taught it to me. We were sitting on the porch steps of the church house when he taught it to me. It's called A Pretty Fair Miss. Said a pretty fair miss all in her garden, and a handsome young soldier came a-riding by. Said, could I impose on a fair young maiden and ask her for my bride to be? Said, handsome young soldier standing by the gateway, a man of honor you might be, but how could you impose on a fair young maiden who never intends your bride to be? Said, I've got a true love that's gone to the army, and he's been gone for 7 years long. And if he stays gone 7 years longer, no man on earth could marry me. Perhaps your love, yours drowned in the ocean. Perhaps he's on some battlefield slain. Perhaps he's taken him another girl and married. His face you'll never see again. Well, if he's drowned, I hope he's happy. Or if he's on some battlefield slain. And if he's taken him another girl and married, why, I'd love the girl that would marry him. His fingers being long and slender, into his pockets they did go. Said, here's the ring that you once gave me before you left here for the war. Said, I've been on the deep sea sailing, and I've been sailing for 7 years long. And if I'd stayed gone 7 years longer, why, no woman on earth could have married me. And that's Pretty Fair Miss. And I think, I'm not sure what exactly the name of this is, but in the book, my daughter could tell you in a heartbeat, but I'm not up on that. All I did was to learn the words to them from the older folks. So when Cecil Sharp came back in 1917, he concentrated mainly on Kentucky and East Tennessee and southwestern Virginia. And he made a comment in one of his diaries that he never quite got back to that feeling of being in the center of that nest of singing birds, because he said that only in the Laurel Country did they sing with a lot of intensity, and did they use a strange little part of the song. He said it's when they put an H before it, and they will start a line off by saying hits. And Dillard Chandler is a good example of that. In Sailor Being Tired, I'm just going to do one verse for you. But this is what he was talking about when he said they will put an H before the I. It's a sailor being being tarred, Lord, he hung down his head. It's a sailor being tarred, Lord, well, he hung down his head. It's he asked a little maid for show him the bed. So you could hear how they would put an H before that ITS. And basically what he's saying is, now listen here, because it's going to be a great story that I'm going to sing for you. And so it's a sailor being tired. Now, Sharp, on his last trip to the mountains, which was in 18, and of course they had a pandemic then too that was going on in their lives, the great flu epidemic of 19 and 18. And my mother said that it actually started in the winter months early that year, like in January or February. And then she said as soon as it warmed up, that it like went away. But she said as soon as the cold weather came back, that it started right back in again where it had left off. And that reminds me so much of what all we've been through with this pandemic. And I am so thankful and grateful that Augusta gave me the opportunity to do a class again this year, that they're doing their best to keep this thing going online, and they're doing a superb job as far as I'm concerned. I think Cecil Sharp would approve. But on his last trip over here, he made the comment that there was no way that he had any kind of musical notations that could explain what the people were doing with their voices when they would do these. He called it a fillip or a flip up at the end of a line, like Granny would say, young Emily was a fair maid, she loved to drive her boy. That little kind of yipping sound at the end of that second line, she would do it at the end of every second line and at the end of every fourth line. And so he said there was no way that he could have musically notated those ornamentations. And he said that was the thing that struck him so, other than the previously mentioned things about the singers from the Laurel Country, was the abundance of ornamentation that was present in the songs. And you could hear it in all of their singing. And you know, the amazing thing is that they kept this alive and they were willing to teach it to me. And so somebody asked me, why in the world would you take on an apprenticeship after all of these years of teaching people how to sing ballads? And I said, well, mainly because I've not truly been able to teach anybody what I would call knee to knee, with the possible exception of Sam Gleaves. And I want everybody to know that I got to sit across from my daughter, and I get choked up even thinking about it, but at 50 years old almost, and me being 68 years old, my daughter and I sat knee to knee, and she learned all the songs that Cecil Sharp collected from my great-great-aunt Mary Sands. So, I guess that's about it from me and Cecil Sharp, but I am open for questions. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, if folks have questions, they can just put them in the chat, and we'll got about 5 minutes for questions, I believe.
Okay. Anybody got a question out there? I see Mimi typing away. She'll have it to me in a minute. But my other, until questions come in, I'm going to, from Mimi right to everyone, I've taken about 12 week-long classes. I know where that's going with me. Yes, you have. Mimi has been a big support of mine. She always has been. She's also a dear friend. So I know that when me and my cousin Jerry and Jim went out to San Diego Festival, we stayed at Mimi and John Wright's house, and they made me feel like family. And just like Aunt Zip had Adam go across that footlog and haul his poor old person all the way back over to the house so she could sing the 7 Nights Drunk, which is one of the most raunchiest songs. I mean, it's not just dirty, it's raunchy. So that's why I didn't sing those last 3 verses. But so that he could listen to that song, I'm sure he muchly appreciated it. But my other, the young man, Ian Kirkpatrick, is also a great singer, and I consider him one of my children now, because he and I have argued back and forth over Zoom, and because it took me forever to get used to the lag time. So, I wonder what Cecil Sharp would have thought about all this. I mean, can you imagine somebody in his world back in 1916 thinking about what was to come and that I would be singing? And if it is out on YouTube, and I don't doubt that it is because Andrew said it was, he would have loved it. That's exactly right. From Cindy. Hey, Cindy Harris. Cindy Harris to everyone. I bet he would have loved it. He would have. He spent a lot of time up in eastern Kentucky where Cindy is, collecting ballads and all of those wonderful songs that my family call love songs. So, we're rounding up on still about 5 minutes, Andrew, or do I need to get back into another?
I think we can fit in one last question. Flan has a nice request there for the director of that song with those verses to donate for later.
Oh, you mean the? I promise you, Flan, the next time that I see you, that I will sit down and teach you that song knee to knee. All 7 verses. Promise.
Sheila.
Yes.
My name's Jeff Harris, and I live here in Elkins. I don't know if Sean or if Seth or Emily or Andrew are familiar with Channel 3 on the cable or not. There used to be a lady on there who has now passed away by the name of Eloise Mann. And Eloise had a weekly country music show. And her and one of the guitar players on her show did the verses that you did, except for the one about the pants on the floor, on her TV show very regularly. And so I'd heard that before, and I thought that was really great that you did that song. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. The traditional way of singing that, now that verse that I sang about the pants, the britches on the floor, was actually, in the old traditional song, it was a bed quilt laying on the floor and buttons on a bed quilt. But Inez Inez Double Barrel Chandler, who knew more dirty songs than anybody in the whole wide world, and taught them all to me. So one of these days, Flan, what we need to have is a body ballad sing like we did. Well, we've done that before. Yes, we have done that before. But let's do it next year for sure when we're all back together and we can all sing knee to knee. But thank God for Zoom meanwhile. And thanks to Emily Miller, she's been a lifesaver during all of this and so patient with me because I'm old. It took me a long time to figure out this stuff. So, a body ballad sing, yes. Emily just said, yes, it will be done. Okay, that sounds like fun. Well,
I believe, yeah.
I just realized, Andrew, that what I've been doing is looking at a clock that is stuck. So I have no idea what time it is, but I've been kind of glancing up at the one above the kitchen table over there, and it's stuck because it has not moved from 7 minutes to 7 in a long time. I have no idea what time it is.
Well, we are right at 7 o'clock, so.
Oh, okay. All right, then.
Right to the
well,
second.
good. I have brought it to a good conclusion. Thank you, and my love out to everybody that came this evening. Thank you all so much. And here's to y'all. And I hope that I see you next year at Augusta, and we'll sit around and sing dirty songs till the sun comes up.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And again, everyone will just give Sheila a big hand for joining us. Additionally, this event is supported by the West Virginia Humanities Council. So they have a brief survey they'd like you to fill out if you can. And I've put the link in the Zoom as well. And again, Augusta is so grateful for the support we get from the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture, and History, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, Davis Elkins College, and y'all. Y'all have been such a great and important part of Augusta. So have a great evening, y'all. And again, thanks Sheila for joining with us. It's been
all right. Thank you, Andrew. And you were just perfect host. Thank you.